Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Dan Maloof, Senior Director of Product here at Irons, and I'm excited to be hosting this week's tech briefing. As a quick refresher for the folks online, any new folks, the purpose of these 30-minute briefings is for our rotating cast of Irons faculty members to dive into the relevant InfoSec news stories of the week and provide you with specific actionable guidance to take back to your teams. With that as a backdrop, thrilled to be joined today by two of our Irons faculty rock stars, Shannon Leitz and Jessica Hebenstreet. Shannon is the founder and CEO of ThirdScore, who previously served as VP of Security at Adobe, where she led product and software security. And Jessica currently serves as the Senior Director of Corporate Security for Quorum Software, which provides software for the oil and gas industry. Shannon and Jessica, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, this is awesome. So with that, let's take a look at the agenda for today. First, what we're going to talk about is the ShinyHunters threat actor group that leaked 33 million phone numbers in a Twilio breach of its Authy platform. We'll dive into that a little bit. After that, Microsoft uncovered two critical security flaws in Rockwell Automation PanelView Plus. And finally, HealthEquity, one of the largest HSA custodians in the U.S., warned of a data breach at one of its partners that led to the compromise of certain protected health information. So interesting one there, a lot of moving parts, and we'll dive into some of the details there. So yeah, obviously a lot of ground to cover today. Jessica, love to see you moving around, getting that background. Oh, that looks great.
My kids were just being very loud at my parents'
It
house.
happens. It happens. Don't worry, I'm going to start with Shannon anyway on on Twilio here. Shannon, what tell us a little bit about Twilio, about Authy, what's going on with this whole thing?
I'm so sad. Authy, 33 million users, that's such a big deal. And, this one, honestly, is one of those ones that are kind of like an ouch vulnerability and an ouch breach, because it was really low bar. Like, it didn't take a lot of skill for an adversary to go after it. I would actually consider this more like a script kiddie vulnerability, sadly. And people make mistakes, so this isn't about blame, but it's really about something to learn from this capability, because I think if you've got API endpoints out in the wild, if you're thinking about your CI/CD process, this one is, sadly, this is an area of responsibility. I think if you put an authentication capability out there for MFA specifically, you should have pretty tight security. Like, your thresholds should be pretty low for these types of mistakes, and you should have a lot of double checking that's going on. And sadly, I think this actually uncloaks a little bit of a mystery behind maybe Twilio's security program for Authy. In particular, it was kind of a breach that brought 33 million phone numbers to the dark webs. It also released potentially some of their user IDs. We didn't get a lot of details out of Twilio. We kind of got a little bit of a summary write-up, and there were more details that you could get out there from a research perspective. But in general, this was like an easy win for ShinyHunters, sadly. And I think ShinyHunters has shown up a lot to go after things. They have pretty sophisticated capabilities. Like, they're kind of a moderate midway level of adversary. If you're not familiar with them, there's a lot of write-ups about ShinyHunters. But this one, to me, was just a sadness, right? We've seen so many unauthenticated endpoints that are out there. And the fact that you could literally just run a phone book against this endpoint and no one detected it, and the data could be spilled this easily, like, it does take a little bit of time for that type of script to run. So the fact that they couldn't cut it off tells you a lot about maybe the detection and responsibility that's going on with this platform. So I guess if you're leveraging Authy, you might be thinking about what's going to happen. The other thing here is, essentially what Twilio came back with is, hey, look, we took it down, and there wasn't really any sensitive information other than these things that we use to serve the population of 33 million. And I think that also tells us a lot about their protections. Like, this actually got missed in a threat model. It got missed in their testing capability, their EASM, if they have it. To me, we don't know if they have any of these things. We didn't actually get confirmation for some of those things. But I think it does tell us that lots of things failed for this to work. And again, this is a script kiddie level attack. Jessica, what do you got for this?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Shannon just said. The one of the most glaring things for me is that they had APIs out there that obviously haven't been pen tested, because this would have been something very easy for a pen tester to check, and then they could have, mitigated the risk. The other thing I think about with this is, they've said now, we took that endpoint down or added authentication, but there's two pieces to that. You also have to have authorization. Like, okay, so people are authenticated. Should they still be able to, just because I'm authenticated doesn't mean I should have the ability to do these things. And so I would be really interested to know if they've taken that next step. And so I think a takeaway from our IANS clients from an API security perspective is, enumerating what APIs you have out there, making sure that you require authentication and authorization, for the API functions to do their thing. And then the other thing is if you use Twilio Authy in your environment for MFA, you're going to need to now educate your end users that there's probably going to be an uptick of phishing SMS or smishing, I hate that word, to the end users. And, I almost want to say, even if you don't use it for your corporate environment, you may want to do an education out to your users anyway, because maybe they previously worked at a company that uses it, or maybe they have a second job that uses it. And so it puts things at risk that way. And so, I think Twilio needs to do better on their security program from what we're seeing from this. But also we have work to do now on communicating to our end users that, we're going to see an uptick in phishing attempts, and to be hyper vigilant and those kinds of things.
Shannon, any other thoughts for potential customers? We have a couple comments here on rate limiting and how that's needed, even if they're authenticated, which Jessica was talking about a little bit.
I think the rate limiting piece is absolutely spot on. This also highlighted the fact that even if these things get out to production, like, what do you have in terms of throttling, bot protection? Those should be standard within a developer's understanding of what they're doing with their application. So their product security governance sort of shed some light with this particular incident, and I think that was a challenge.
Jessica, anything to add there? I see you're typing a response to the question.
Yeah, no, I was just saying we'll answer it live, but I agree. I mean, these are just basic API security things that were missed, and so it makes me question their program holistically. Twilio acquired Authy quite a while ago, so integration should be complete by this point. I know we don't always get there with M&A activity, but if I remember correctly, it's been almost a decade. Like, that's just inexcusable. And so it does make me wonder about the rest of their security program, and in particular their API security program.
And lots of folks use Authy with Twilio capabilities. So
Correct.
This is just something to think about. Like, ShinyHunters didn't have to do much to get there. Anyone could have done this type of attack. And the question is, like, has it happened before?
Well,
like,
and that's actually a really
question.
great point I was going to comment on earlier. Like this, we know ShinyHunter has advanced capabilities, right? But they didn't have to use them in this point. And so, I know fellow faculty Jake Williams also often talks about, like, yeah, there can be all these advanced attacks, but no one's going to blow a 0-day on you if you have this kind of thing available, right?
Exactly.
They're going to save those 0 days for when they really need them. And so it's important to have those basics in place.
Yeah. I mean, this really allowed folks to be enumerated for who uses Twilio. And so if you are one of the users, I would say be more diligent and make sure that any communications from Twilio that you actually are, look at them pretty clearly and closely.
Cool.
All right.
I know we do have a question here about a couple other topics. I will say, if folks do have ideas for topics each week, feel free to reach out. We're happy to kind of take suggestions and things like that too. And yes, Cyber Resilient Act is what we needed here. It's a possible point as well. All right, so let's move on to the second topic that works for both of you. Jessica, you want to take the first bite at this one? The Microsoft finding some critical flaws in Rockwell Automation's PanelView Plus.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is, so the Rockwell Automation PanelView Plus, this could potentially be in your OT environment if you run a factory or manufacturing, or anywhere you may have OT capabilities. This is a popular solution, and so you may have this in your environment. And so what happened here is in September and October of last year, there were actually vulnerabilities reported and advisories reported from, CISA and others about some flaws that had been found. And now Microsoft has come out and said, there's actually exploitation that you can do with these. They're not just these theoretical vulnerabilities that are out there. We're actually seeing exploits in the wild. You can have remote code execution. You can have denial of service. And it has to do with a couple of custom classes that can be abused to upload malicious code. And so, I don't know if up until now, because they were originally announced in September and October, if there just hadn't been anything. But I think at this point, now we're seeing active exploitation. And so that can put your OT environment at risk. It could, if we're, DOSing that environment, maybe manufacturing is delayed on something. And so there could be, supply chain implications here. Or, we could have a ransomware event if we're uploading, random code execution that you can do in an unauthenticated manner because you're abusing these services. And so, make sure, I know that patching in those OT environments can be super touchy. We have to plan for outages and downtime because, very carefully, because we don't want to impact revenue and those kinds of things. However, it's better to do that in a controlled, planned manner than waiting for something to happen and then having an emergency and having to scramble to get things done. And so I think the big takeaways here are, if you have this environment in your environment, make a plan to get these addressed sooner rather than later.
I think one of the things to maybe tack on here is, for this particular issue, what was so interesting about it is that you see with Rockwell Automation a bunch of vulnerabilities that are actually, again, a little bit of table stakes from a software development perspective, like input validation. We know these things exist out there, but what was eye-opening was when you looked through the Microsoft write-up on this, which was what was released recently, they kind of detailed out how they found it. And the fact that encryption wasn't being applied, that the capability that's so sensitive to some of these OT environments wasn't being protected, hardened, that can be really alarming, because we do know that anybody who's using technology like this is more likely to have issues with higher levels of sophisticated adversaries. And that means that you need to have a bit more protection applied to these capabilities. It also tells me that if I'm buying from Rockwell Automation, maybe we have to put some more security capabilities into working with that type of application when implemented, that it actually does need to be sectioned off from the environment. You see, even Microsoft recommends a whole bunch of additional protections beyond just simply patching. And I think that's a really good add, because this is something that you can see that there's a huge amount of implementation that goes into it. It is really slow to patch these types of systems. And even fixing the particular issue that was reported took over 3 months for Rockwell Automation to get to the point where they posted the fix into the NVD. That also tells you something about what their level of sophistication is as a third-party vendor to these companies that are actually going to be putting their manufacturing and industrial workloads on top of a system like this.
Right on. Comment in the chat, they have to follow the Purdue model for deploying OT. That something
Yep.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an OT security expert by any means. I can barely play one on TV. But yeah, the Purdue model is kind of the model that folks go with on this, as they should. It's a good model to follow, but it does take time, because our OT environments are so sensitive to outages and downtime, and it can really impact the rest of the supply chain. It can really impact revenue, those kinds of things. And those systems are sensitive to being, taken down and brought up. You have to do things in a certain order, and otherwise you could really mess things up. So, yeah.
And Shannon, I know you noted in your write-up that I think you said CISA added this to their known vulnerabilities catalog. Is that the kind of thing that folks should be looking at, daily, pretty often, kind of prioritizing based on that, or is that sort of a lagging sort of indicator?
I think across the IANS faculty, we all agree you should be bringing the KEV into your vulnerability management practice and making sure that you're staying abreast of those, because they should be the more heightened, critical priority vulnerabilities that at least you're getting to those within your practice. I think that also isolates and highlights where you can put priority. Again, to me, this took a while for Rockwell to provide a patch, but then, how long will this live within environments out there? Because OT is so challenging to patch itself, it still needs to rise to the highest level of your risk registers.
Yeah, and on
So,
that note, with the KEV and the NBD separately, you can subscribe to updates. So it's not like you have to go out to their website every day. You can get it.
that's right.
I mean, getting it pushed to your email isn't like the best way to get updates, right? I think we all know we lose things in there, but it is a way to stay on top of these. I'm sure they have some kind of feed you could subscribe to as well, incorporated into your threat intelligence program if you have one, those kinds of things. But I agree with Shannon. It's super important.
Awesome. And will we have time to touch on Patch Tuesday? Another possibility, maybe if we get enough time later in the call, but another call for if you do want topics to be discussed, feel free to reach out beforehand. We're happy to add them in. So with that, you guys good to move to HealthEquity?
Yeah.
All right. Who wants to take first crack at this one? What's going on here?
I can. So HealthEquity is a healthcare fintech company. So what does that mean? They manage HSA, health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts, health reimbursement accounts, and 401ks, right? And so what happened is a partner of theirs had a for personal use only system compromised, which then helped to gain access into the HealthEquity environment. And then they were able to exfil data, including some PII data, because keep in mind the kinds of things you do with your HSA and FSA is you have banking information, your address, you're going in there asking for reimbursement on, your doctor's office visits. That often involves, uploading a, receipt and those kinds of things. And so, a lot of juicy information involved here. What I found interesting is that HealthEquity filed their 8K with the SEC on July 2nd, but it looked like this had been going on for quite a while. And so, when we think about the rule that went into effect in December of last year, you have 4 business days from the time you determine that it's material to file your initial 8K. And so I find it interesting that it took so long to make a materiality discussion on this or decision. And so I am eager to see what the SEC does with that, and if there's any enforcement action, and if they're going to go back and ask HealthEquity, like, prove to us that it really took you months to come to this, materiality decision, because I kind of question that, especially, I mean, I am not a lawyer, and I preach and preach and preach that you have to have your legal involved in this. But I just from an armchair perspective, I kind of question with the data that was, exfilled and breached, that it took them this long to make a materiality decision. The other thing I'll point out here is that they have said it is not related to the Change Healthcare fiasco earlier this year, right? So, as a reminder, Change Healthcare, which is part of United Health Group, had a big ransomware event. It took months and months to recover. I think they're still in the recovery process for some, in some places. But this is now a separate health breach that has happened and probably impacts quite a few folks. What do you think, Shannon?
Yeah, I did a lot of digging on some of these topics, and I think when you look at the HealthEquity one, first thing that pops out to me is, oh my gosh, please, if you're doing incident response, you have a breach, have a location on your website where you can actually be descriptive about what is happening so that you can get rid of some of the speculation. I think, honestly, what's happened to HealthEquity, probably why they got to their 8K, and I think there's some confusion around filing 8Ks. You can see clearly in their 8K write-up that they said that they don't think it's material. And so this still goes to, you filed it months later. Why would you do that? And some of it, I think, is because they've had such press around this issue and they've been sort of closed-lipped around it. I think we have to get to the point where we're actually a lot more transparent, more specific, like how many records would be great, because they have an obligation too to be able to file with the HITECH Act and be able to provide anything over 500. So, you get some indication of sort of the size of this. Also, like, it took them maybe a few more extra days to share that it was a SharePoint related issue. They recently set up to do a strategic project with Microsoft for Azure and basically modernizing their stack. See, there's little tidbits that are out there. And sadly, I think if they had just taken this on as being more transparent about the fact that, hey, look, we had a problem. If it was less than 500 users that were affected, horrible that those 500 were affected, but it's a small percentage of their overall population of end users that are leveraging this type of service with HSAs. And so to me, why be so cloak and dagger about it? I think that actually puts them on the back foot when it comes to being able to share these types of things. Also, as soon as SharePoint kind of came out as one of the challenges that they were encountering, I think that also tells us, again, this was another low bar attack, something that, anybody can go do. And that tells us that they didn't have the right protections in place. Things like DLP capabilities, sensitive data handling. Those are all what we expect of PHI related organizations where they're handling sensitive data with healthcare data related aspects to it because of being so highly regulated. So to me, this was like, really, you move some sensitive data without encryption into a SharePoint and didn't have good entitlements. Like, there's a bunch of, again, things that we can learn from their environment that relate to why an event like this happens, and just kind of doing that follow-up to figure out where the blameworthy element is and what would have had to happen for it to be protected.
Yeah, and I think the other thing here that really kind of stuck out to me is that it was from a personal use only device of a partner. Why was that even ever allowed to connect into their environment? I mean, let's just start there, right?
Are we talking BYOD?
BYOD of a partner or a contractor, right? Like, it wasn't even a HealthEquity like person, right? And so let's talk about that for a moment. And why was that even ever allowed to connect into their environment? That is pants on head crazy. Like, I just can't with that.
Exactly. And so this is another reason, like, it also tells us that maybe their zero trust isn't really been a strategy, or like they're limping along on that. And I think that's something for especially healthcare organizations in our clientele. This is a good reason to start that process of zero trust and really trying to move forward with it, especially if you're going to, have BYOD in your environment, sadly.
Yeah. And I mean, but even like, beyond zero trust, it sounds like there wasn't even a good defense in depth castle and moat, architecture in place. There were not multiple controls. It was just like, come in, go out, from what we can tell from the publicly available data. Of course, we don't have inside data, but if I'm speculating based on what I was able to read, it sounds like, let alone zero trust, which I agree, people should be moving to, organizations should be moving to, but there weren't even like basic defense in depth kind of controls that were, failed here. It just was, pretty wide open.
Well, and SharePoint, I mean, we know SharePoint just has so many challenges in every environment.
So hard, yes.
Everybody I talk to about SharePoint struggles with SharePoint permissions. And I think this is maybe a call to action for the community to really start putting that entitlement review of SharePoint back on the table, especially because SharePoint underpins so much of the Microsoft stack. And if you're a Microsoft client, which most of our clientele is, I would say this is that opportunity, a bright shining light to go back after it, because you don't want to end up with this type of issue. If you do, then basically I think be descriptive about it so that people aren't speculating.
Well, and to that point, Shannon, I know you're doing a symposium tomorrow on Microsoft Copilot. And I know one of the points that other faculty bring up is that some of these over permissioned situations can come out because Copilot, it's not going to go find something that you don't have permission to, but if you have permission to something, it's going to find it when you ask Copilot to help you with something. And so you're going to lead into more issues that way as well. just kind of tying things
That's why
together.
I'm like advocating for please go fix your
Right.
SharePoint permissions. If
Yeah.
you're getting Copilot into your environment, this is going to get even more challenging. I
Yeah.
think somebody also asked a couple of things. One is, these are end users who might be sharing these files because they get the chance to hit that share button. Where you're going to get protection is going to be things like having a DLP capability integrated. And another thing that was asked was whether or not this was do we know who the actor was that went after this? This was an insider risk. It looks like it was actually somebody who had essentially the ability to go download a file, who took it upon themselves to pull it down to their device and kind of is walking away with it from an insider risk. That's at least what it appears to be. We don't necessarily see a group actor actually looking like they're claiming this attack. So again, that's a pretty low bar. Insider trust is just something that has to be really figured out. And I do think that you're going to have a better chance if you can look at your permissions and get them down to a limited set, with sharing being part of this, really thinking about what you're going to do for DLP.
Do you know if it was a mobile device or PC? Do we care really from a policy? Yeah, I was gonna say.
No indication whatsoever. Again, they've just been really tight-lipped. It looks like it's a small issue, but I think the way they've handled it, it's made it a bigger question mark in the community.
Mm-hmm. And really, who cares if it was mobile or PC at the end of the day? I mean, at the end of the day, they were able to abuse their access and exfil the data. So, there should be better controls in place for that.
Yeah.
Right on.
I think we have a few minutes left. There's a couple of things from the Patch Tuesday to maybe reference for the community. So there are some 0 days that patches were released for, and a couple of those are actually seeing exploits in the wild, especially if you've got like Hyper-V in your environment. You might want to take a look at those. And I think that there's another one that's pretty scary as well, which is their MS HTML spoofing. So if you have a chance to take a look at the recent announcement, I think it was like 140 plus patches were released. So
just a couple.
Yeah, just a few. Yeah. And 4 0-day level issues. So something to take consideration of.
Yeah, I've been on vacation, so I'm a little out of the loop, so I'll let Shannon speak to all of that. I was completely offline for the last 10 days.
Sounds magical.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I know we only had a few minutes, so yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks. Appreciate that, Shannon. That was awesome. Kevin had a question about the SPO data breach. We might have to get into that next time. I'm not sure. We know a whole lot right now on that, but yeah, another potential fodder for next week, so stay tuned. But yeah. With that, we are right up on time. So Shannon, thanks for doing the little final minute on Patch Tuesday there. Really appreciate that. Jessica, thanks for coming back after vacation. Appreciate that as well. Thanks everyone for joining today. And yeah, hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye for now.